The night I'm about to tell you about still gives me goosebumps when the wind rattles my tent flaps. It started out quiet, one of those early autumn evenings when the air smells like pine needles and cold creek water, and the fire crackles just enough to make the silence feel alive. I was camped near the edge of a small meadow, deep in the Allegheny Forest, a place I'd hiked into earlier that day after following an old logging road that had nearly disappeared under moss and ferns. I'd picked a flat spot beneath a stand of white pines, pitched my tent, and gathered enough wood to keep the fire going till midnight. The stars came out sharp and clear, and I remember thinking how lucky I was to have this little patch of wilderness all to myself. By the time I turned in, the fire had burned down to red coals, and the forest had gone completely still. You know that deep kind of stillness? The kind where even your breathing sounds too loud. I must have drifted off around midnight, but something woke me later. A faint sound, soft but deliberate. Not wind, not rain, just movement. At first, I thought it might be the wind nudging a branch against the tent, but the air was calm. Then I heard it again. A light, crunching step in the damp leaves. Something was circling. I stayed perfectly still, listening. My mind ran through every creature I knew could be out there. Raccoon, deer, maybe even a black bear. I kept my food bag hung high from a limb, so I wasn't worried about attracting anything big. But curiosity comes naturally to animals. The steps stopped right outside my tent. There was a faint sniffing sound, a quick, sharp breath, and I could hear something lightly pawing at the ground near the corner where my boots sat. My pulse thudded in my ears as I slowly reached for my flashlight. The zipper on my sleeping bag sounded deafening as I eased it open. With one hand, I flicked on the light and cast the beam toward the noise. Two golden eyes glowed back at me from just beyond the mesh. Wide, curious, and not at all afraid. It was a fox. A red metronome, and went back to sniffing the fire ring. I crouched beside the tent and whispered, "You're a brave one, huh?" My voice sounded small and strange out there. The fox didn't move. I could see its breath puff in tiny clouds. It pawed once at a charred stick, then backed away a few steps and sat down again. Its eyes caught the light in an amber flash, bright and unblinking. Something about the stillness between us felt almost sacred, like I'd stepped into some small, wild ritual that wasn't meant for human company. Then it turned, ears twitching towards the trees behind me. I heard it too, a soft rustle from the meadow grass, followed by a quick, sharp snort. The fox froze, muscles tensed. Out from the shadows drifted a young deer, pale in the moonlight, stepping lightly between the pine trunks. Its coat shimmered silver under the thin veil of fog beginning to form in the meadow. The deer lowered its head to sniff the ground where the fox had been moments earlier. And for an instant, the two animals shared the same patch of light, close enough that I could have reached out and touched them if I dared. The fox gave a quiet huff, something like a sigh, and trotted off into the tall grass, its tail disappearing in the mist. The deer lifted its head and looked my way. Its ears twitched, but it didn't spook. Instead, it walked a few paces closer, nostrils flaring. I could hear its slow, steady breathing. There was something ancient in that sound, a reminder that out there, away from roads and screens, we're all just another creature trying to belong. For several minutes it stood there, then slowly wandered off, following the fox's trail into the meadow. The night closed around me again, quiet, but full of that electric hum the woods get when life is moving just out of sight. I stayed awake a while longer, sitting by the dim coals, thinking how odd it was to feel so connected, and yet so small at the same time. When I finally crawled back into the tent, I left the flap open just a crack, listening to the forest breathe. When dawn finally came, it arrived gently, a slow silver light filtering through the pine needles. Water's edge crossed the bank and disappeared into the tall grass toward camp. My heart gave a small jolt. They hadn't been there last night. Following the tracks back to camp, I noticed something else. Near the fire pit, the small pile of leftovers I'd wrapped in foil, some bacon grease and crumbs, was gone. Not torn open or scattered, just missing. The foil was pushed neatly aside, and there were 2 faint prints in the ash beside it. That fox had returned sometime between sleep and sunrise, quiet as a shadow, finished its investigation, and left again before I woke. I imagined it slipping through the grey dawn, tail low, its coat catching the first hint of light, vanishing back into the trees like a whisper. As I brewed my morning coffee over the rekindled fire, I couldn't help but glance often toward the meadow. Every breeze that rippled through the grass made me think of russet fur moving just out of sight. I wondered if the fox watched me from the tree line, curious about the strange creature who made fire and slept under nylon instead of earth. The smell of coffee drifted up, mingling with pine and smoke, and the forest began to stir, a woodpecker knocking in the distance. The faint rustle of wings as a jay swooped overhead. That morning light brought with it a deep, quiet peace, the kind that makes you slow down without realizing it. I thought of how that fox had crossed so near, so unafraid, and how the deer had trusted the same space. For one small night, I'd been accepted into their world, not as a threat or intruder, but simply as another creature beneath the stars. The tracks in the mud were already softening under the warming sun, fading as the day grew brighter. I took one last look before they disappeared, grateful for the wild company I'd kept without ever saying a word. After breakfast, I decided to take a slow walk through the meadow, just to see where the fox's trail might lead. The grass was still heavy with dew, and every step left a dark footprint behind me. The sun had climbed only a little above the pines, and the air shimmered with that cool, damp scent of waking earth, fresh, alive, full of possibility. As I walked,
It's home. I crouched low, careful not to get too close, and waited. For a moment, the forest seemed to hush itself around me, the breeze pausing in the branches, the distant birds quieting their chatter. I thought I saw a flicker of red in the shadows, just a blur, but maybe that was my imagination. I backed away slowly, not wanting to overstay my welcome. As I turned back toward camp, I noticed how alive the world had become now that the sun had fully broken over the ridge. A chipmunk darted across my path, chattering furiously, and a hawk circled overhead, its cry echoing across the valley. The light caught the morning fog, scattering it into thin ribbons that curled and rose like smoke from invisible fires. It struck me then that even in my solitude, I was never really alone out here. Every rustle, every call, every breath of wind was company of a sort, wild, unpredictable, and honest. Back at camp, I began to pack up slowly, not out of hurry, but habit. Folding my tent, I found another faint paw print pressed into the dirt just by where I'd slept. Fresh, perfect, almost like it had been left for me to find. I stared at it for a long while before brushing it away with the flat of my hand. It didn't feel right to leave it there, open to the elements, like a secret that needed keeping. The sun was higher now,
and the day's warmth was beginning to chase off the chill. I slung my pack over my shoulders, gave the clearing one last look, and felt a quiet tug of gratitude. Nights like that remind you how thin the line is between our world and the one that moves unseen all around us. I didn't need a photograph or a trophy, just the memory of those bright eyes in the dark and the soft hush of the forest breathing in time with mine. By the time I reached the trailhead, the forest had fully woken. The hum of insects had risen with the sun, and the trees whispered in a warm breeze that smelled faintly of sap and moss. I paused before stepping onto the gravel road, taking one last look back through the tall pines. From where I stood, I could see just a sliver of the meadow where the scent of pine faded into the familiar smells of pavement and distance. I didn't play the radio. I just let the memory replay quietly. Those glowing eyes, the hush of the trees, the soft crunch of paws on leaves. Funny how something so small, so fleeting, could feel more meaningful than a week's worth of ordinary days. Out there, under the stars, surrounded by the living pulse of the woods, I'd felt like I belonged to something bigger. That night, back home, I found a smudge of dried mud on my boot sole, probably from the spot where I'd seen those paw prints by the creek. I didn't clean it off. For a while, I liked having that bit of the forest with me. A reminder that the wild isn't some faraway thing. It's closer than we think. Sometimes just beyond the tent flap, breathing softly in the dark. I still camp often, and each time I wake to the first light slipping through the trees, I listen for it. The faint rustle of leaves, a distant step in the underbrush. That quiet rhythm of life carrying on unseen. Maybe I'll see that fox again someday. Or maybe I won't. But either way, I know it's out there, moving through the same woods, curious as ever. And somehow, knowing that is enough.